Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today, it's time to go and do another one of our recommended PC builds. This is where we go through and choose every part for a system based on our testing and research, put it all together and see how it performs for the spec we're targeting. In this video, we'll be talking about a budget gaming rig for 1440p gaming updated for 2020. So the idea here is to provide excellent 1440p performance at a reasonable price with the best bang for buck parts. In our previous build, we put together a neat 1080p gaming rig using 3rd gen Ryzen, and many of those parts and recommendations have been carried over for this build as well. But for the first time in these build videos, we have researched and made recommendations for every single part, right down to the power supply and case. So this build should be ready to go for any buyer that wants bang for buck gaming. This build video is split into 3 parts. Firstly, we'll go over the components you see here and why we chose them. For a couple of components, there will be a choice between a few different options depending on your budget and needs, but we feel everything we'll go through provides excellent value. After that, build montage time, then we'll show off the completed system, take a look at final gaming performance, and wrap it all up. As a quick reminder, the system we're building here isn't meant to be the absolute cheapest PC we could put together for 1440p gaming, but rather a great budget bang for buck system that performs well now and has room for upgrades down the line. We don't want you guys buying just cheap, crappy components that won't last you. We want something that's both balanced and great value. Let's start with the processor, and after testing AMD's latest Ryzen 3000 CPUs extensively, putting them up against last gen parts and Intel competitors, there is one clear bang for buck option, and that is, which I have right here, the Ryzen 5 3600. As of filming, this CPU is available for just $180 down from an MSRP of $200, which is a fantastic price for AMD's high-performing 6-core 12-thread pass based on the latest, Zen 2 architecture. We chose the Ryzen 5 3600 for several reasons. It's about $40 cheaper than the Ryzen 5 3600 and provides essentially the same performance. The 3600X does have a better cooler included in the box, but that's not enough to warrant the upgrade in our opinion. We also don't recommend any higher end parts than the 3600 for a budget build from either Intel or AMD, as these components provide a diminishing return for gaming. Yeah, it's nice to have 8 cores in something like a Ryzen 7 3700X or Core i7 9700K, but you're looking at spending at least 50% more for around 10 to 20% more performance in games. Another great option is the Ryzen 5 2600 or the Ryzen 5 1600AF, both of which in our testing perform similarly. They're both Zen Plus processors, and there's a slight edge to the Ryzen 5 2600. The 2600 is available for around $140 these days, while the 1600AF is a $100 part when it's in stock, and it can be a bit difficult to find. If you're going for the absolute dirt cheapest 1440p gaming rig, the Ryzen 5 1600AF would definitely be my choice, given it's $80 cheaper. But it is substantially slower in the most CPU intensive games, with the Ryzen 5 3600 providing up to 25 to 30% more performance in the best cases we've seen, along with similar gains to productivity. And these sorts of performance deltas are true even with 1440p class GPUs like the RX 5700. It's only down with more your RX 580 class GPUs does the CPU difference become negligible. Given the price difference, this does give the 1600AF the best cost per frame figures, so again, a great choice for dirt cheap systems. But given the Ryzen 5 3600 isn't going to bottleneck us as much and is right at the point of diminishing returns for CPU performance in games, I do prefer it for budget builds and is an especially good choice for longevity, especially more at that 1440p class. I want to get the best performance out of our GPU choice, and I think the Ryzen 5 3600 is a great budget buy for $180, but on even tighter budgets, I would be going straight for the 1600AF at $100, so you do have a bit of a choice there. For the motherboard, we're continuing to recommend the best B450 motherboard on the market, and that is the MSI B450 Tomahawk Max, which we have right here. This board delivered the best VRM thermals in our B450 performance tests, which indicates it's not only suitable for Ryzen 5 parts like the 3600, but also has the power delivery system necessary to handle more power-hungry chips like the Ryzen 9 3900X and the 3950X should you choose to upgrade your CPU later. And if you make a really sensible B450 choice now, you won't need to upgrade your motherboard to handle a future CPU upgrade, which will save you money in the long run. Weak B450 boards designed for just Ryzen 5 can throttle the CPU when paired with the 3950X in challenging conditions, but this won't happen with the B450 Tomahawk series. The B450 Tomahawk Max is available for $115, which is a fantastic price for a board that will last you for a while. Again, not the outright cheapest board, but we feel the quality provided here is worth it, plus it has a great feature set to go with its beefy VRM. You might be considering a higher end X570 board given its newer generation built for 3rd gen Ryzen, but these boards are much more expensive and the features on offer are more geared towards high-end productivity than 1440p gaming, where we feel that B450 is perfectly fine. The graphics card is always the hardest part to recommend in these builds, especially at 1440p with a budget system where a number of cards can service this resolution. If you want super high frame rates, yeah, an RTX 2080 Ti will be the way to go, or if you just want 60 FPS, then something like an RX 580 might be for you. Those cards are at either end of the spectrum right now though, so naturally we find that something in the middle is right where the bang for buck value lies. For that, we need to be looking in the $300 to $400 market, and based on some of our latest testing, our recommendation is the Nvidia GeForce RTX 2060. In the past few months, Nvidia has dropped the price of the RTX 2060 down to just $300, with both the Founders Edition model we have here and the EVGA KO model available at that price. These cards do go out of stock frequently due to their popularity, but we have seen several resupply runs, so we're pretty confident this GPU will be available around this price for a little while. At $300, the RTX 2060 is priced very similarly to AMD's Radeon RX 5600 XT with performance that's about the same. But for the reasons Steve mentioned in his latest analysis, which include a more stable driver experience and less variance between potential models, our choice right now is the RTX 2060, and if you want more information on that, we do recommend checking out that analysis video from Steve. The driver situation is improving on the AMD front, especially with some of the latest releases, but we're still opting for the RTX 2060 at $300 for now. For that price, we do get a consistent 1440p gaming experience above 60 FPS, with averages in our testing often in the 80 to 100 FPS range, which brings higher refresh rate displays into play. If you have a bit more cash to spend, then our next choice would be the RX 5700 from AMD, and that's what we'd recommend if you want around 10% more performance for a 10 to 15% increase to price. We do have the XFX model here, which tends to be one of the best budget options out there. Of course, there's stuff like the RX 5700 XT that we'd also recommend as another step up above that. Memory is pretty straightforward. Our testing has shown that the value point right now lies with 16GB of DDR4 3200 CL16 in kit form. Pricing is almost identical to DDR4 3000, but $10 cheaper than DDR4 3600, all delivering roughly equivalent performance in games, give or take a few frames. For Ryzen builds, a 2x8GB kit like the one we have here of DDR4 3200 CL16 is what we'd go with. 16GB is enough capacity for modern gaming. We definitely wouldn't recommend 8GB these days. Now there are many memory kits that fit these specs and pricing will vary in your region, but we've gone with one of the cheapest options on Newegg, Team Group's T-Force Dark Z, or Dark Z as we probably should be saying in Australia. CPU cooling is taken care of with AMD's included Wraith Stealth box cooler. Not the best, not the quietest, but given it's included with the processor, we don't see much reason to spend money on another cooler in a budget build. Storage is also a very simple affair. Naturally, it will depend on what sort of capacity you want, and I imagine lots of system builders will have drives already that they'll bring across to this build, although we do recommend a fresh install of Windows if you are moving to Ryzen for the first time. But if you're starting from scratch, a great budget boot drive option these days is sort of your 500GB class SATA SSDs. You won't be getting the best performance out there, but these are much faster than hard drives and in today's games deliver similar performance to the best SSDs you can get. Outside of sales, most of the drives that fit this class start at around $60 US, and we've chosen one of them here today in Team Group's GX1 480GB, although there are plenty of other models out there including the Team Group L5, SanDisk SSD Plus, Kingston A400 and so on. We like using Team Group stuff though, so yeah, we've gone with the GX1. For power supplies, we wanted something affordable around the 500 watt mark, which will be sufficient for this kind of build, as well as a good warranty period and 80 plus certification if possible. A lot of PSUs in this budget category start around the $50 mark, so we opted for the, and that's going to make the RAM fall over, the Thermaltake Smart BX1 550 watt at a $55 MSRP. This is the non-RGB model. Don't know why you'd want RGB on a power supply, so no RGB here. and it has 80 plus bronze certification with a 5-year warranty. Seems like a decent deal for an 80 plus bronze unit for a budget build, so we'll give it a try today. And finally, the case. This is mostly a personal preference thing for the sort of style and features you need, but I'll recommend a case that I think is quite good value for the features it provides. Today I'll be building in the Deepcool MA-Cube 310, which starts at just $55 as a neat ATX mid-tower with a full tempered glass side panel. I have the P version, which is the performance version, costs a bit more at around the $60 to $70 price, comes with a vented top panel as well, hence the P. But either way, I think it's a great looking case, so we'll see how the build process goes. And speaking of the build process, that's all the parts we'll be using. I guess it's time to get going with the build. I'll be back in a few minutes to recap everything and talk about performance, so let's kick it off. Alright, so that's the build complete, and you can see it sitting here nicely beside me right now. It's not on at the moment, but it did post fine the first time, already installed Windows on it, run some quick benchmarks to check out a few things, which I'll discuss in a moment. But first, a few things about the build process. Using the Deepcool MA-Cube 310p was a better build experience than I expected, especially with the magnetic tempered glass side panel that really easily comes off, just slides out. It's really simple, secures in place nicely, and you get that magnetic system on both sides of the case. Plenty of sensible cable management routes, a decent amount of space. There's room for radiators in the future on the top and the front, and personally I think it looks excellent. It's nothing fancy, but given you can get this basic design for as low as $55 US, I think that's a steal. I was partly concerned about the thermals, given the case comes with just one rear exhaust fan, nothing on the front, and yes, the components do get a bit warm, but not as bad as I was expecting. Under a Handbrake X265 stress test, the Ryzen 5 3600 reached around 86 degrees Celsius stock, which is on the high side, but the system was still quiet under this load and there was no throttling to speak of. There's almost no room for overclocking though. That would require a cooler upgrade, and honestly overclocking is really not worth it with 3rd gen Ryzen anyway, given the lack of overclocking headroom. While the CPU does get punished under these conditions with a Handbrake test, It fared well for gaming. Here's Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which was one of the most performance-intensive games we normally benchmark with, in the very area that Steve benchmarks. Using the high preset, which is what we recommend for gaming, we typically hover a little over 60 FPS in this super demanding area of the game, with the occasional dip just below 60. This isn't quite the same level of performance we see in our GPU benchmarks, mostly because Steve tests with a Core i9 9900K and without Shadowplay capturing gameplay at the same time. But the numbers we're seeing here are excellent for a budget build and right in line with what we expect. And I was very happy with the temperatures despite some of the cooling constraints I was just talking about with Handbrake, with GPU temps maxing out in the low 70s and CPU temps in the mid 60s. A higher performing title like Resident Evil 2, testing with the graphics priority preset, which is normally higher than we recommend, again delivers great performance in the 80 to 90 FPS range, which is right on what we expect. And finally, quick look at Borderlands 3 in some of the most intensive areas, running again with ultra settings, but with volumetrics turned down to medium. Mostly a 60 FPS experience here, some dips a bit below, but again, quite decent numbers from a budget 1440p system. That's only a very brief look at performance, but basically it does perform as expected for these components. If you want any further information on how the Ryzen 5 3600 or the RTX 2060 perform, we have comprehensive benchmark videos of both that go into detail on expected gaming performance and how it stacks up. So yeah, not going to spend any more time on that, otherwise the video would be very long. You'll also notice here the system has no RGB. Yep, that's something you might consider if you were going for aesthetics, but really I wasn't with this build, and RGB components tend to cost a bit more, so lack that bang for buck factor. Despite minimal lighting, I think the clean black and silver aesthetic used across the build here, from the motherboard to the memory and the GPU, has come together nicely, and you get a great view of it through the side panel on the case. Here's a summary of everything we used in this build. Total cost comes out to around $850 US, which is a fantastic price for above 60 FPS gaming at 1440p. You've also seen me pair in this video with LG's 32GK650F monitor, which is a great budget 1440p 144Hz choice in case you don't have a monitor already. As always, links to everything in the description below. If you were really targeting a super slim budget, there could be a few changes made here, like downgrading to a Ryzen 5 2600, using a cheaper B450 motherboard, or cutting down the GPU, but all of those will affect performance and ultimately the longevity and upgradability of the system. We put a big emphasis with this budget build on the CPU, the motherboard, and the GPU, while cheaping out a bit on everything else, and yeah, that's generally how we recommend you build a budget system. Of course, there's also room to go the other way if you do have a bit more room in your budget to spend. For example, if you had about $100 more, I'd recommend upgrading to either an RX 5700 or RX 5700 XT GPU, and then beyond that there's upgrades like, improving the storage, or even upgrading to something like a Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9 CPU, which would put you a little bit closer to the performance numbers that we typically produce from our test systems when we're benchmarking GPUs and all that sort of thing. So that is, of course, something as well to keep in mind if your budget allows. So that's it for this video. I think we've pretty comprehensively gone through our recommendations for a bang for buck 1440p gaming system, and the results I'm quite impressed with, both from a visual standpoint with this case and also the performance that we were seeing. So yeah, we'll wrap this one up with all the usual stuff. As always, links to all the components that we used are in the description below. What else? We've got our Patreon page. If you want to support us directly, get access to our monthly live streams, Discord chat, behind the scenes videos, all that sort of thing. We also have merch available. Again, links to all this stuff is in the description below, and I'll catch you in the next one.